Welcome to the ninth session where we are using ancient wisdom to meet the new global goal of education of creating a well-being curriculum. The way of knowing of IKS, the Indian knowledge system, or what is truly an international knowledge system, that's how it was conceptualized as, is the unique thing about it is that it develops character, and that's the difference between IKS from the current knowledge system. Its ways of knowing like Pratyaksha, Anuman and Upaman are used by many and can be used by everybody. The sense perception route, the inference route, the comparison route. But it's Shabda Praman route. That's what develops character. And this emerges as the voice of conscience within the individual, which leads to character development. This is the final goal of IKS's education. It is not a sub-goal. How to achieve it? Purified intention, human intention, is a necessary condition for it. Neither the truth of quantum physics nor the secrets of nature are obvious to senses. Can the way of knowing then be obvious? Sense perception or its inferences are inadequate to figure out the truth of quantum physics or the secrets of nature. Look at this video. Can sense perception see the most important thing that binds society? Did 2008 recession break it? Look at this video. Decisions of highly educated persons caused the 2008 crisis. What reaction did they generate in the minds of the common public? Would you like to be at the receiving end of such reactions? After you complete your education and put those ideas into practice? Those accused of causing the 2008 crisis were highly educated, and that too from the best institutions of the world. What could education not impart to them? They too used comparison of their bonuses with others. Their companies compared their profits with others. So comparison was used. What inferences or anuman was drawn from this upaman or comparison? What actions resulted after the use of inference and comparison in this manner? Such sense perception based upamana and anumana, inference and comparison, led to actions that society later called as senseless, even though they were driven by sense perception. Is such a sense perception led decision making process a reflection of character? We know that character is not a quantifiable number like a profit in a balance sheet or a bonus calculation. Yet its subtle nature binds society. How to develop it? What do you think is the most important thing that education should achieve? Please take a break and write down your thoughts. What is the difference in the current knowledge system's way of using comparison and inference inspired by sense perception and the Indian knowledge system way? The current knowledge system led educated decision makers in 2008 to feel that social pain is their personal gain. How can education help us visualize that the pain of society must be prevented? Current knowledge system could not do it in 2008. How does Indian knowledge systems do it? To put it simply, IKS concludes that the same energy powers all of creation, yet this energy expresses itself differently in its manifold manifestations. Hence, IKS seeks unity behind diversity. In this manner, others' pain is visualized as one's own pain, not gain. We can think of the same electricity powering different wattages of electric bulbs and many other electrical devices. CKS would compare differences between these devices and infer results. IKS is different. How? It will conclude that the same energy powers all human thought and action. It then experiences the energy as flowing within to reveal its truth, and it sees the same energy as powering all the electrical devices too. The revealed truth is tested by sense perception, compared and inferred. It leads to three types of truth. One, revealed to give the secret behind quantum physics. Two, sense perception based. And three, that which can be applied in life using the earlier two. Using the revealed truth, humans compared themselves with the animal kingdom to infer what differentiates them from the rest of creation. They found that the ability of the intellect to transform the heart was the difference. Hence, the intellect was the way that the humans could declare their distinction from the rest of creation. This led to Shabda Pramana, IKS's Para Vidya. This unity of creation idea doesn't seem to be clear to the current knowledge system. What happened with this lack of clarity? The revealed truth created ethics as a voluntary choice in IKS. Without this self-choice, despite a focus on ethics, if the self-choice is not there and you keep focusing on ethics as the current knowledge system is doing, it was unable to prevent social pain. We know that, we are, for the last 150 years, ethics has been in the curriculum of the current knowledge system. Yet, we are not finding evidence of social pain being removed. The IKS, what it does is it activates the voice of conscience through its way of knowing Pratyaksha Pramana, which help all use inference and comparison, guided by the voice of conscience. Some have concluded that IKS's goal of character development is needed today. We will find out how character development occurs in IKS. We will also see how the current knowledge system got diverted in implementing the idea, even though it is always focusing on ethics. The lectures on research ethics using research methodology identified three ideas that diverted current knowledge system away from the concepts of the IKS. These ideas diverted IKS importance of ether in creation, the source of the voice of conscience within humans. Its education awakened conscience to build character. The first of these ideas is reductionism. Descartes' work explains non-humans as automata. This led to the reductionism idea. But further research diverted Descartes' creative principle that guides non-mechanical phenomena. IKS, on the other hand, works only using this creative principle to understand how the digesting duct, the non-human, how the automata works. Has IKS's Advaita sadly been misinterpreted in only a physical dimension here? Has this faulty interpretation which is doomed to be rejected by evidence, lead to a historical bias that IKS is totally unscientific? And did a rejection of IKS lead the scientific community to the opposite end, as in the next idea? And the second idea is scientific materialism. It says that the brain produces thought as the liver produces bile. The role of the mind is negated, even though Darwin thought of thought as more wonderful than gravity. IKS creates well-being through discrimination ability in the mind. Three ideas that diverted current knowledge system from IKS have been discussed. And the third one is the, after reductionism and scientific materialism, is the philosophy that sense perception is our human essence. And this idea came from Feuerbach's idea that it is the only human essence, sense perception. He lays stress on ethics. But sense perception is the first way of knowing of animals too. That distinction has been forgotten. So what then is the distinction of humans from animals? So IKS will call it a misinterpretation of human essence by saying sense perception is our way of is our first way of knowing, and such misinterpretation, according to IKS, can never lead to ethics. Similarly, we saw Newton's concepts were misrepresented. Professor Chomsky, who according to MIT is one of the most cited academics in human history, says, and I quote, "The properties of matter Newton showed escape the bounds of the mechanical philosophy," unquote. He also states, I quote, "It is commonly believed that Newton showed that the world is a machine following mechanical principles and that we can therefore dismiss the ghost in the machine, the mind, with appropriate ridicule. The facts are the opposite," unquote. This is Professor Chomsky. Were Aristotle, Kant, and many other such ideas which were close to IKS misinterpreted over time? Did a deviation from these hamper identifying how the origin of character within humans occurs? What is the overall understanding of nature and the human's place in nature that builds character? What is the nature of investigation needed to find it? We explore now the vision, the IKS vision that enabled its education to build character. What is character? The ability to do the right thing is a sign of it. And what is the right thing? The right thing is not to harm others. Good character also implies looking after your virtues and protecting them. Having the right vision is important for that. What happens when your vision suffers? And you insist on driving in life with the wrong vision. Will it be safe for you or others? Even if you manage not to harm others, what if you harm yourself? Good character starts with having the right vision in life. This occurs when one does not walk through life with a self-obsession, looking and thinking only of oneself, mindless of the task and the obstacles that are natural to it. What if you are totally self-absorbed? Is it safe to walk through life when you are in such a state where you are totally self-absorbed and unable to see the larger context? IKS starts with sense perception to take consciousness to higher levels of perception. From Aparavidya, it starts teaching Paravidya. From Aparavidya, it starts teaching Paravidya. How? This movement of consciousness starts with simple observation of nature. Nature is considered as the first teacher in IKS. The search for meaning starts by observing small things in nature with a vision to reach the higher levels of human consciousness. IKS says that we must learn from things in nature to inspire us. We must develop the vision to see good traits in all things around us and acquire their good qualities, discarding all others. In this manner, they can learn from the loyalty of the dog, the discipline of the ants, the fact that animals hunt only when hungry. They don't keep killing needlessly out of fear that they will be hungry tomorrow. This self-discipline helps prevent depleting the animal population for all other species, enabling all to survive. Is there something we can learn about vision from nature? Who can inspire us to have a micro and macro view at the same time? Instead of taking all examples from Indian knowledge systems, can we use an example from the Western world? If analyzed from the 5 elements point of view, IKS would say animals live on land and drink water. How can humans differentiate themselves from animal kingdom despite using the downward elements of land and water just like them? IKS's macro view is that human nature is full of bliss. Its education discovers it. The micro route to experience it is through developing character in our conduct. Who can inspire us to use both a micro and a macro view at the same time? So, if we see, from the Western world point of view, can the Western symbols inspire a visual experience of rising up or soaring of human consciousness? A soaring bird can. Which one will do it? There are two views that we can take of the world: the bird's eye view as well as those of the immediate tasks at hand. Both are needed. The eagle has an eye that is famous in all cultures. The USA uses the bald eagle as a national bird. The USA national bird keeps only one partner in life. Is that a sign of right vision its founders had in mind? The eagle can soar the skies, confident that it will catch the smallest detail even while having the macro view, the larger picture. Can humans conquer the inner sky and soar great heights, raising their level of consciousness upwards? Can they take decisions to tackle immediate reality without losing focus on the bigger picture? Would education that inculcates such a vision not be useful? A soaring consciousness to take all above sense perception is IKS's idea to build character. This session will examine two things: the theory of character in current knowledge system and the source of character in IKS. So, one, it will give the theoretical constructs of character, how it is defined in current knowledge system versus how it is created in Indian knowledge system through the concept of, and in Indian knowledge system it is created through the concept of unity of thought, word and deed. This unity is similar to the inner fire or of a firm resolve rising up within the individual, and the unity of the thought, word and deed involves the sacrifice of temptations. Any sacrifice of trickery for petty gains builds character and creates trust in society. The second concept discussed will be the source of character in the IKS. It will examine that thoughts may be flying like the wind in the air, but they all rest within ether, the sky. Is ether a scientific concept? Has it been recognized by philosophers? If so, has it been used by them? Are the problems in society caused by the inability of current knowledge system to use this element of creation within humans for them in education and by them in life? Does our inner voice of conscience reside in ether, not outside, but within all of us? Can practices during education activate this voice of conscience? IKS says yes. If the voice of conscience is activated beyond thoughts that keep moving like the wind, can a formal recognition of this stabilizing element be ignored by current knowledge systems' way of knowing or knowledge? IKS seeks to analyze nature so that we can derive inspiration from it. Also, it develops a vision to select and learn the best qualities in nature. IKS's inquiry starts with observing and learning from nature as it is made of 5 elements, and it studies the nature of each of these elements first. What is the nature of air? The nature of air is to move. The nature of sky is to remain stable. Then Air comes. The nature of air is to move. So what is there within us that cannot be seen but moves? IKS concluded that it is the human mind. It cannot be seen, but it is always moving. Then, to find out what can contain the mind, the question arises, what is air contained in? Nyaya philosophy tells us the world is full of contrasts. Did it reach a conclusion by looking at the nature of elements, as elements are the basis of all things in creation? We discussed earlier that these elements are earth, water, fire, air and sky or ether. We discussed that fire is the dividing line between elements that are downward pointing and those that are rising above. Among all, earth is the base, the most downward element. It doesn't move. Water's nature is to fall down on earth. So what inspires consciousness to move upwards? The dividing line in elements is fire, as its nature is to go upwards where the wind and air exist. And the nature of the sky, the air's nature is to move. The moving air should be contained in something that doesn't move. Just as the opposite of fire's nature of going up is water's nature to fall down. So air is contained in ether or sky or space. Hence, inspiration that gives stable solutions or stable laws that don't change arise from space. So IKS concluded. The elements in nature are within us too. Character should be stable, hence it can only emerge from an element whose nature is to remain stable. If human character is to be built, it should be such that it should not fall down into the dust of the earth. It should be able to swim across the river of sorrow. It should pass the fire of tests, of twists and turns of adverse circumstances to enhance it. Just as gold is purified by fire, it should be strong enough not to be blown away by the wind, the storms of life. It should have the eternal quality of the sky in it. Thus, the way IKS approaches character building is different from the way of CKS. IKS analyzed the unity of atoms, and it is proved in gross elements that there should be similarly a unity in these subtle ones too. IKS does not go too much into theory. It uses exploration of nature to interpolate it to the inner nature of humans. It feels that whatever is visible in nature outside also exists within humans. Modern quantum physics discovers that there is an essential unity of atoms underlying all of creation. This is true in the visible world. IKS states that just as the visible world has an underlying unity, so does the inner world have an underlying unity of elements. Some elements are gross and the others subtle. If unity of atoms is proved in gross elements, there should be a unity in the subtle elements too. This may lead to a question: what makes two humans with the same biology so different? If all humans have bodies performing similar functions, why do all humans exhibit different characteristics of behavior, likes, dislikes, etc.? The answer of IKS would be that the functions performed by the combinations of gross elements are the same. However, the individual has freedom to use the subtle elements. The use of subtle elements reflects individual character and characteristics. Western philosophy did not conceptualize the importance of ether in the way IKS did. IKS uses ether as the integrating force of all its concepts to transform human character. If we look at the Hellenistic period, Zeno of Citium was one of the most prominent philosophers then. He talked of goodness and peace of mind emerging from living a life full of virtue. His ideas were popular in the Roman period, in the Renaissance, and even today as Stoicism. He too believed that the universe is God, much like IKS starts with studying the universe. But he recognized only 4 elements. He is considered to be a great philosopher-scientist in the tradition of Socrates, Plato, Pythagoras, Aristotle. This is how the Wikipedia shows his drawing along with them. The critical importance and use of ether has not been comprehended for making consciousness rise through education for a very, very long time. Zeno of Citium recognized ether but seems to be confusing it with Agni or fire. The Wikipedia uses 9 references in a few lines to sum up his thought. His ideas seem to come from IKS except for the understanding of ether. He states that fire is above air, while IKS considers it below air. The creation, preservation, creative destruction idea of IKS too is the basis of his work. Like the Vedic ritual of fire to raise human consciousness, he too calls fire the basis of all activity in the universe. Hence, the importance of fire within, or fire as signifying energy, is recognized by Zeno. In fact, he makes fire the ether form from which the individual soul arises and the world soul exists. It states that this divine fire or ether, and I am quoting him, Zeno of Citium, this divine fire or ether is the basis for all activity in the universe, operating on otherwise passive matter which neither increases nor diminishes itself. The primary substance in the universe comes from fire, passes through the stages of air, and then becomes water, the thicker portion becoming earth and the thinner portion becoming air again, and then rarefying back into fire. Individuals are part of the same fire as that of the universe. Following Heraclitus, Zeno adopted the view that the universe underwent regular cycles of formation and destruction. The nature of the universe is such that it accomplishes what is right and prevents the opposite, and is identified with unconditional love, which, while allowing it the free will attributed to it. So this is what the Wikipedia is saying about Zeno of Citium. The divergence in ways of knowing of CKS and IKS is Shabd Pramad. It clarifies how to use ether element in education. Sense perception is current knowledge system's first way of knowing, but ethics are beyond sense perception. Can current knowledge system fulfill its goal of ethics with its way of knowing, or should it explore wisdom's way of knowing, ancient wisdom's way of knowing, the international knowledge system's way of knowing? The importance of Moses and his revelation of 10 commandments are accepted by all religions. This implies that for thousands of years, the role of sky as a verified source of knowledge was accepted subconsciously. Its wisdom was an accepted way of knowing, a guide to life. IKS views it as the voice of conscience and seeks to awaken it. Could this way of knowing be incorporated in education? The current knowledge system has been unable to do it, even though Aristotle and others recognized sky and ether's importance. They could not integrate it in education, or were misinterpreted later. If their ideas were practiced, society wouldn't have suffered. OECD found in 2008 that education couldn't transform humans. All ideas of all thinkers, and subsequently all theory of current knowledge system, rests on the importance of ethics. But how to build it within the individual is not clear. IKS awakens the ether element, the voice of conscience in human consciousness, to build character. It first recognized that all 5 elements that are the basis of the universe are also present within humans too. Using this logic, they looked upon sky and ether through inner revelation to activate an awakened voice of conscience. This voice of conscience constantly guides and energizes ethics and morals. Patrick Supps of Stanford looks at the past to improve education. His quotes of Aristotle reveal IKS concepts that CKS doesn't seem to use. He explores, and I quote Patrick Supps from Stanford, the use of the past in order to help us think more cogently about the present and the future of education. That's what he explores. And what does he find? He finds Aristotle giving the well-being idea. Thus, the new goal of education traces its roots to ancient wisdom. Where did it lose its way? Where did the first difference in emphasis between current knowledge system and Indian knowledge system arise? Aristotle's well-being is based on righteous conduct, the central theme of Indian knowledge system, or IKS, or International Knowledge System. So what's the difference? Supps states, and I quote, "There is in Aristotle's politics a succinct statement of the aims of education, but to understand Aristotle's thoughts on these matters, it is necessary to examine a wider context, especially on the central themes of well-being or happiness and the theory of right action." Unquote. IKS's route to righteous conduct is Satyam Vada Dharmam Chara. Speaking the truth, that's the root. Though Socrates and Aristotle search for the truth, the IKS centrality of speak the truth is missing. Supps finds Aristotle's line of argument as, and I quote, "subtle and difficult to lay out in simple form," unquote. Therefore, the emphasis on the subtle is the basis of knowledge. IKS explores subtlest of subtle, or ether, for wisdom. What is this subtle that Aristotle aims at? And I quote, "Every art and every inquiry, and similarly every action and pursuit, is thought to aim at some good," unquote. This good too must be subtle to grasp in its essence. Its value must be beyond sense perception. OECD now wants education to inculcate reflection before action. A need beyond sense perception, therefore, now exists. Especially, the time has come for Aristotle's contemplation. The nature of sense perception is to seek pleasure without contemplation. Supps lists Aristotle's 4 sorts of lives chosen by men, and I quote, "There seem to be 4 sorts of lives chosen by men. One is the life of pleasure. This life, Aristotle says, is appropriate for slaves or beasts. The second sort of life is one which aims at honor. The third sort of life is one whose object is the pursuit of wealth. The pursuit of wealth is a means but not an end to the good life. Finally, the fourth kind of life is that of contemplation." Unquote. We again find that to meet the new goals of education, it is fruitful to revert to ancient wisdom. The origin of Maslow's need hierarchy and a reflection of IKS concepts is found in Aristotle's work. Is IKS's goal of character as the end of education shared by Aristotle? Supps states, and I quote, "Aristotle concludes that the virtues are dispositions or states of character," unquote. So, will virtues arise within humans and build character? Will Aristotle say that they arise naturally without effort? Or will habits have to be formed as in IKS? If humans are endowed with sense perception, will it not lead them to avoid ethics and seek pleasure? Will practices incorporated in curriculum be needed to form habits that lead to ethics? The character building curriculum of IKS rests on subtle practices. Would Aristotle agree with IKS using practices like speaking the truth to form habits to develop character? Or will they just come naturally if we use CKS, the current knowledge system's idea of putting ethics in the curriculum and waiting for a natural result? Can similes of earth and fire help us understand inner nature of humans using elements of nature as a guide? Supps quotes Aristotle, and I quote, "None of the moral virtues arise in us by nature," unquote. As the body is composed of the earth element of which stone is made, Aristotle says, and I quote, A stone which by nature moves downwards cannot be habituated to move upwards, nor can fire be habituated to move downward. Unquote. IKS uses fire's natural upward movement for raising human consciousness. As qualities of all elements are present in the human being, their properties of going down or up are part of human nature. Hence, Subs quotes Aristotle, and I quote, "Neither by nature nor contrary to nature do the virtues arise in us. Rather, we are adapted by our nature to receive them and are made perfect by habit." Unquote. Therefore, we have to adapt our nature to receive ethics, and the way is practice. Just as skills in soccer or skills of a trade need a lot of practice, so does building character. The mind can change, character should not. Subtlest element of space will make it stable, where the air of thoughts moves. The philosophy of space in current knowledge system now may be near the IKS view. The Kepler Space Institute has experienced scientists, space engineers, professors, and an international collection of researchers in technical and non-technical space-related fields. It publishes a journal of space philosophy. In its 2013 issue, it revisits and redefines Plato's and Aristotle's view on ether. It presents the new concept of ether, and I quote, "The characteristics of the four natural forces are well understood. We can predict with certainty how they will react with matter. Ether, however, is less well understood. We do know that it is real and that it is constant and universal." Unquote. Thus, the most important element in IKS is less well understood, and this is admitted by the current knowledge system. Hence, the need to present its new concept. Does this concept of science tally with IKS? The first property of this new concept presented is that ether is the conduit of energy. This is totally in sync with IKS view presented in Sir John Woodruff's book Like the World is Power, where energy or Shakti meant power. The second thing it says about ether is that, and I quote, "It is a product of an era gone by." Unquote. And I again quote, "In the newer concept as presented here, it is spelled ETHER with a capital E. This reminds us that ether is a conduit of energy and is a product of an era gone by, an antecedent estate, an older and easier dimension." Unquote. Do some scientists affirm that ether exists and is really important? Do the authors use the view of reputed scientists? Two examples are given in this article. It states, and I quote, "Albert Einstein claimed that the special theory of relativity does not compel us to deny ether." Einstein further stated, "According to the general theory of relativity, space without ether is unthinkable, for in such space there not only would be no propagation of light, but also no possibility of existence for standards of space and time, measuring rods and clocks, nor therefore any space-time intervals in the physical sense." Unquote. The article further quotes Nobel laureate in physics Robert Lawlin, who reaffirms that ether exists. I quote, "It turns out that much such matter exists. About the time relativity was becoming accepted, studies of radioactivity began showing that the empty vacuum of space has spectroscopic structure similar to that of ordinary quantum solids and fluids. Subsequent studies with large particle accelerators have now led us to understand that space is more like a piece of window glass than ideal Newtonian emptiness. The modern concept of the vacuum of space, confirmed every day by experiment, is relativistic ether." Unquote. What does the article propose in content? The article proposes that ether is the key to organizing, accommodating, and affecting all other elements. This implies that our earlier contention that air is contained in ether is validated by them. Also, the lower elements too, like fire, water, and earth, they propose, are organized, accommodated, and contained in ether. I quote, "We propose ether is the medium that functions to organize, accommodate, and affect all of the elements and forces of nature, both well understood and not so well understood, including earth, water, air, and fire, as well as gravitation, electromagnetism, the strong nuclear force, and the weak nuclear force." Unquote. The authors contend that ether existed before the Big Bang too. It remains a force in itself prior to energy and matter. This tallies with IKS concept that some call as God, and I quote, "We contend that there was an antecedent state in our universe prior to the Big Bang, and it was filled with ether. It is and was a solid reservoir of vacuum energy, a force in and of itself, the fifth force in nature, and it formed prior to matter and energy as we know it. Even if ether did not have a cause and effect on the entry of matter, at least it constituted the perfect envelope into which matter could be maintained." Unquote. What else does the article state? It states, I quote, "There might have been two or more antecedent states in our universe. The first might have been nothingness." Unquote. Buddhism's concept of shunyata and IKS study will explore the state of nothingness in mathematics later. It is obvious that it has nothing to do with the mind. Hence, it will be a state where the mind is zero or infinite. Hence, a constant that is beyond mind and matter exists in ether. In the antecedent state, the article states that six forces of nature, the four natural, and I quote these, the four natural forces, those being gravitation, electromagnetism, strong nuclear and weak nuclear, and two special forces, unquote. It says, and I quote, "They are believed to be embedded in the ether. All of these are constant and universal." Unquote. Hence, ether is above and beyond all. The importance of comprehending ether and using it for Shabda Pramana as the basic way of knowing can be seen with the article's conclusion, and I quote, "The characteristic of the four natural forces are well understood. We can predict with certainty how they will react with matter. Ether, however, is less well understood. We do know that it is real and that it is constant and universal. Nothingness implies the absence of the four natural forces and the absence of all cosmic constants, and therefore the absence of ether. Although nothingness might have been the state of the universe before ether came in." Unquote. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy lists contemporary questions about human character. There are two things where IKS and CKS agree. The current knowledge system and IKS agree. The first thing is that everyone is capable of becoming better. The Human Fraternity document signed by His Holiness the Pope and His Holiness the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar Mosque asks educational institutions to bring out the best within humans. The second thing this document does is becoming good requires access to appropriate institutions. Now, is this a question, that does it require access to appropriate institutions? And for this I quote Stanford's encyclopedia, which says that on the one hand, on a view of character such as Aristotle's, which relies on ordinary capacities to experience the pleasures of self-expression and to respond with friendly feelings to others' efforts to help, almost everyone is capable of becoming better. On the other hand, if Aristotle and others are correct that character is shaped by institutions of political, economic and family life, then becoming good will require access to the appropriate institutions. Yet this is not to suggest that becoming good is out of our reach. It may be helpful here to recall Rawls' description of a realistic utopia in The Law of Peoples, when, following Rousseau in The Social Contract, he writes that just institutions take men as they are and laws as they might be. Our psychological natures and the institutions that promote good qualities of character are, in this view and in the views of others, discussed throughout this entry congruent. Unquote. Character is a personal trait. Stanford Encyclopedia explains differences in personalism in Western and Vedantic thought. A production line education model will not be able to deliver character. OECD's 2008 change in goal of education implies that a different way is needed. That is why IKS and its Shabda Pramana are explored in this series of interactions. What was the reaction to such a depersonalized approach of the current knowledge system? Stanford Encyclopedia states that the 19th century saw, and I quote, perceived depersonalizing elements, unquote, in philosophies of, and I quote, Enlightenment, rationalism, pantheism, Hegelian absolute idealism, individualism as well as collectivism, unquote. As a reaction to it, personalism developed. It says, and I quote, personalism always underscores the centrality of the person as the primary locus of investigation for philosophical, theological and humanistic studies, unquote. The encyclopedia finds close parallels to or equivalents in Eastern thought, and it says, and I quote, more unambiguous parallels are found, however, in Vedanta, unquote. This is Stanford Encyclopedia. Stanford Encyclopedia states that Vedantic thought explores the who am I question. It seeks its answer beyond the human body and the mind. The tendency of humans is to identify the body and the mind with the idea of oneself, and I quote Stanford Encyclopedia writing, what most clearly distinguishes Vedantic personalism from Western personalism is that the former builds on fundamental teaching of all Vedanta that the true self exists beyond the limitations of the transient body and the mind and beyond the tendency to identify with these, unquote. It further states, and I quote, whereas Western personalism is often characteristically defined in terms which must be seen as pertaining to the mental level, or sometimes in particular in the 20th century to the physical body, unquote. In this quote, the encyclopedia seems to say that Western personalism, seen from a Vedantic point of view, is identifying oneself with the mind. It goes further to imply that in the 20th century, the identification of oneself was more with the physical body. A clash between Indian knowledge system and current knowledge system is ruled out. Therefore, IKS is the international knowledge system. The encyclopedia agrees that IKS supports moral character formation on a humanistic level, as in Western personalism. It also affirms that IKS doesn't ignore the body. The idea of I as a physical body is a view of sense perception being the first way of knowing oneself or answering the question, who am I? By exploring sky or ether element, does IKS reject the body or devalue its importance? Stanford Encyclopedia states that it does not, and I quote, this does not mean, however, that according to personalistic Vedanta, the body should be ignored or devalued, unquote. What harms our comprehension of the truth about oneself? It is an error that harms the body and the mind to identify with either of them. The encyclopedia states that it is from its perspective primarily the erroneous identification with the mind that is harmful to the body. The actualization of our true and higher nature as consciousness brings light to both the body and the mind, including all the faculties so closely analyzed by Western personalists like will, imagination and reason. Thus, it at least indirectly supports, to the extent it is needed, the moral character formation on the humanistic level which is emphasized by Western personalism, unquote. The other Eastern philosophies that the human fraternity documents looks up to in education have a similar approach. Personalism seeks to transform character. The encyclopedia finds that, and I quote, most traditional Chinese and Japanese thought shares with personalism an emphasis on the need for concrete practical transformation of character as a prerequisite for insight, unquote. Wisdom gives insights. These come from practices. Stanford's encyclopedia finds Vedanta being the closest to personalism among other Eastern philosophies. It says, and I quote, in the Chinese and Japanese versions of Buddhism, the Indian tradition of devising specific practices and exercises for this purpose was continued. At the same time, all of these schools share an understanding of the ultimate or true reality as rather impersonal than personal, which makes them further removed from personalism than Vedanta, unquote. We conclude that there is scope for IKS to contribute to current knowledge system. There is a philosophical basis in personalism philosophy to explore IKS, as it seeks to transform character just like IKS. This is in line with Western thought from Aristotle to current scientific ideas of ether, we have discovered till now. In the next session, we will explore the philosophy and practice that enables this. More so, we will attempt discussing it in a way that appeals to believers, non-believers and skeptics. Using IKS practices will help all, whatever be their mode of investigation. Practices develop character in IKS. This course lays a deep emphasis on practice. Every attempt is made to make all the lectures very short. A 5-minute slot at the end of this lecture is being given for silent sitting. This is to enable the participant to mull over what is said. Whatever has been heard should be repeated in the mind so that it gets absorbed. Just as sugar is stirred in a cup of tea or coffee with a spoon, use the spoon of silence to stir the sugar of Indian knowledge systems in your mind. It takes some time for the tea or coffee to become sweet. Patience is very important. The perspectives shared in the course will seem meaningful only if such silent sitting is done to mull over what has been said. Else, the half an hour spent in delivering the lectures will be a waste of time. We welcome you to undertake an inner journey during these 5 minutes. Only then will knowledge that is outside you will become wisdom inside you. The time allocated for this is actually 20 minutes, not 5 minutes. The time should be increased gradually. This is also a time for the mind to take rest. In case it cannot do that, mull over whether the voice of the conscience has guided you at any time in life till now. We accept challenges for the physical body in games. In a gym, we can have a 20 minutes plank challenge. We may exchange challenges on the quantity of food we can eat. Can we go beyond such challenges to the second step of the Indian knowledge systems? Can we see if the mind itself can take rest and maybe stop working? Can we explore what will happen if it becomes zero? Remember, it is not good to challenge the mind. It rebels and makes you do the opposite of what you want it to do. It is far simpler to observe the mind. For doing this, first the physical body should move as little as possible. Observe the mind as it tells the body to move. You are not telling the body to move, the mind is telling the body to move. Observe the mind. Move away from the mind and see what it is forcing the body to do. Watch the mind as if you are sitting on a fan at a distance. When you are at home, Shavasana in yoga is a good posture for this practice. Try to first silence the body, then the mind. For those who have mastered this, they can try the next method. When you think of nothing, can you experience love without giving it a shape of a thing like your favorite food or a thing that you want to own or the physical form of a person? Can it just be love without an emotion to a person or a thing? Can it be love for the sake of love? How do you experience loving yourself? The purpose of this course is to help you discover yourself, that loving being beyond the body and the mind.